My Schizophrenic Life, The True Story of Tracy Poe. Part 7, Schizophrenia. Chapter 31, Schizophrenia. While I was on Westpac 8384, I had gotten a letter from a girl named Cheryl. She had been my friend from 3rd grade, David's girlfriend in high school. He had written her a letter from Korea that said he slept with a loose woman and she did not want to go out with him anymore. David slept with a lot of women. He always had a different girlfriend. Cheryl had sent letters with her picture in it to me and to Paul, David's friend from high school, who had joined the Navy after he heard how hard the Marine Corps was on David and me. When I got home on leave, I called her, and we went to Baybrook Mall. I wore the brown sweater, tutti frutti cotton pants with the pleats, and my elven black suede boots that I got in Hong Kong. We walked around the mall together for a while, and I felt good and thought that I looked good as well. Cheryl was a very pretty girl, and I was proud to walk around with her. We made plans to go to the seawall in Galveston, Texas, and go skating. The drinking age was 19 in Texas at the time, and Cheryl told me to get 3 bottles of a certain brand of white wine. I thought that was excessive, but did as she asked. I was not a big drinker until the 1990s. Sure, I got drunk in port while on Westpac, but I never craved alcohol while at sea between ports. We went to the seawall in Galveston and parked the car. We drank wine. She drank most of it, but I was a little buzzed. She put on her skates, and I got my skateboard, and we went skating on the seawall. It was hard because she swung her legs in a wide, arching manner, and I almost hit her with my skateboard several times trying to ride beside her. I asked her if she wanted to see me in Hawaii, and that I would get her a ticket, and she said she could not. 2 days later, she came to my house when my parents were gone. My dad worked shift work, and my mom practically lived at her friend Aileen's house as they were best friends. Cheryl brought a bottle of Seagram's with 7-Up. Her friend was there with her at first, and Cheryl filled a glass half full of Seagram's and the rest full of 7-Up. Her friend reminded her that she had to go to work at the BBQ place later, but she drank it quickly, and the next thing I know, she passed out by the toilet. For the longest time, I could not get her to move, but eventually she lay in my bed and told me to call her work. I called Brown Sugar's BBQ where she worked and told them she was sick. She lay passed out in my bed for about 2 hours. Finally, her mom called because she had called her at work and found out she was not there. Apparently, she had given her mom my number before she came over. She had sobered up enough to leave and her mom came and got her. She then started dating a guy named Mark who was a hairdresser that lived in the area. I had never even kissed her. She ended up married to Mark but got divorced a few years later. My brother had brought over my rifles and some ammo as we had talked about going to my father's cabin and shooting them. My father had built a cabin with my mom in the woods of East Texas. My dad did not like guns because his best friend was cleaning a rifle and shot and killed himself when my dad was in high school. My brother had held on to my guns while I was away in the Marines, but he brought them to my parents' house and had put them in the front living room. They were cleared of rounds with the magazines removed. I had a Mini 14 .223 caliber with a black folding stock and a 40-round clip, and an old 1943 M1 carbine made by General Motors during World War II. It had a 15-round magazine. I had only been on leave less than a week by then. I found myself alone most of the time. My father did not drink, and my mother would go to Aileen's house to drink beer every night. I did not drink in my father's house but on the rarest of occasions, and never while he was there. During the week leading up to my incident, I found myself alone for the first time in over a year. Being alone made me feel uneasy. I was watching television and I heard mumbling that sounded like the television. It was a strange mumbling that I could not understand. It sounded like a weather radio in a foreign language off in the distance. I thought it was coming from the television. I heard it ever so often, but not all the time. This went on occasionally for a week. I realized that when the television was off, I could hear it also. When I realized I could hear it without the television, I started to get paranoid. I looked forward to when my father was off work, but he would pretty much lay in his bed and watch his television. He went to work the next night and my mom went to Aileen's to drink beer. I had been home for around 2 weeks and had 2 more weeks to go by this time. On the night of the incident, I could hear the mumbling again. I turned off the television and I could still hear it. I got paranoid and scared. Then I distinctly heard men shouting outside my house. They were saying, to the left, move to the left. I could see in my mind enemy soldiers advancing, popping up and running, and then falling back down in the prone position, like they were assaulting a position. I could see it in my mind, and it seemed like it was really happening. I went into the living room and locked and loaded both rifles. I had them both. The M1 carbine was in my right hand and the Mini 14 was under my right arm. I went into my bedroom and the yelling seemed to be coming from outside. They were still saying, "To the left, to the left." I could hear it. I went to the left side of the bed. The window was directly in the middle of the bed. I looked out, raising the blind with my left hand while I held the two rifles. One was in my right hand and the other was under my right arm, but I could only see a little to the right and the voices were saying left. So, I circled back around my bed and went to raise the blinds with my left hand, and the Mini 14 slipped a little, and in trying to adjust the slipping Mini 14, my grip on the M1 carbine slipped, and it began to drop while I was on the right side of my bed. As it fell, I tried to catch it with my foot and grabbed it with my hand at the same time. The barrel of the M1 met my shoe, and in grabbing it, I pulled the trigger. Next thing I knew, my ears were ringing, and there was a tear in my shoe over my big toe, and it was smoking. I was still worried about the men assaulting my house, so I laid the M1 carbine down and then grabbed the Mini 14 from under my arm and laid it down and picked the M1 carbine up again, and I looked out the window, moving the blinds with my left hand, and all I saw was the neighbor's house. The shock soon wore off and I realized I had shot myself in the foot. I laid the M1 carbine down and called my mother, who took me to the Bayshore Hospital. I walked in and went to the check-in window and told the receptionist that I had a gunshot wound in my foot. She asked, "Is it bad?" And I said, "I don't know." I did not get blood anywhere as it was all caught in my shoe. There was a slit in my shoe along the length of my toe, and you could not see a hole in the bottom of my shoe as the bullet had popped through the rubber sole. They took me to a triage room and removed my shoe to reveal a hole in the middle of the base of my big toe. Some nurse guy in scrubs said something about him working for the government. They took me to a room and soon a cop came in to investigate the gunshot wound, and I told him it was an accident. I told him how the gun had slipped. I never told anyone at the hospital about the voices. In the Marines, my unit were never special operators, but we emulated them by giving each other code names, like we called Ingram, Grom. Well, my code name that I was given was Spaz, and I sure lived up to it. I was in the hospital one night before going into surgery the next morning. That morning, a nurse came in and said, "I am going to give you your goofy shot." And she gave me an injection in my arm. I did not know what it was, but I think it must have been liquid Valium. I was high as a kite, and I could hear the mumbling voices. I do not remember much about the surgery, but I remember being in a euphoric state as they rolled me in a wheelchair to the operating room. After the surgery, I was put in a hospital room. There was a little tube coming out of the wound on my toe, and they had a vacuum tube attached to it to suck out any buildup of blood and other fluids. The doctor had cut a flap of skin from next to the wound on top of my foot and pulled it over the hole and sutured it in place. He then took a skin graft off my leg and covered the area left exposed where the flap of skin originally was. The hole was bigger on the top of my toe and smaller on the bottom where the rubber sole of my shoe protected my toe from more severe damage. The doctor had also put in 3 K-wires through the bones of my toe, 2 longer wires down the length of my toe, and 1 short wire across my toe. After a day, they took out the tiny vacuum hose from the wound, and on the next day, I was released. I went back to the doctor a week later and he said everything looked good and released me to travel. I was home about 5 more days, and then on crutches I caught a flight to Los Angeles and then the 5-hour flight to Oahu. I made it back to K-Bay before my leave ran out and did not get in any trouble. Chapter 32. Back to K-Bay. At the first formation, when I came out on crutches, all the Marines in the battery broke out in applause. It was embarrassing. Corporal Buchanan had been my team leader and roommate when he was a lance corporal when I first got to the battery. He was now a corporal and was my friend on float, and I trusted him. I told him about hearing the voices when I shot myself, and he said that if they found out, they would lock me up in a psych ward, and I believed him. So I did not mention it again until the year 2000, and this was 1984. I went to a sick call that morning. The corpsman Doc Johnson looked at my foot, and 2 weeks' worth of hairs had begun to grow out of the flap of skin covering the wound. He said, "Are those sutures?" And I said, "Those are hairs." I then saw the doctor and he gave me 30 days of light duty and said that it should not really bother you. He then sent me to Tripler Army Medical Center to be evaluated. I could walk without crutches and left them behind and took the military bus from K-Bay across the Poly. and over to Tripler Army Medical Center. I was sent to the orthopedics hallway and waited in the hall in a chair with other servicemen. The doctor of orthopedics at Tripler Army Medical Center sent me to the X-ray department. I waited out in the hall for that, and then they took an X-ray, and you could see the 3 wires in my toe. I took the X-ray film back to the orthopedics doctor. He said that we had better leave those in. The civilian doctor back at Bayshore had said they should be removed in a few days. The orthopedics doctor at Tripler Army Medical Center gave me a medical order to get a cast with a toe plate. It was a small white paper, and on the form was a box where the doctor had written, "Cast with toe plate." I went down the hall to where they put casts on and waited in line after turning in the small paper with my order on it. There was an Army medic sergeant who was casting up people. He was mad I did not have crutches. He was so worried about the crutches that he did not read the order I had turned in. He put me in a cast up to my knee and left my toes hanging out. I told him that it was wrong, that it was my toe that was injured, and he looked at the paper and said, "Oh hell." Then he scabbed on a toe plate on my cast, but it was just attached on the outside and was not integral to the cast. He begrudgingly gave me a set of crutches. I had gotten there about 10:30 a.m. and was done by noon, but they only had one bus back to K-Bay, and it was at 1600, 4 p.m. So, I went to the library and started reading The Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien. In 4 hours, I had read a good portion of the book. I got back, and the next day, the new gunnery sergeant that replaced Gunnery Sergeant Reyes, Gunnery Sergeant Jones, had made me the battery runner. I spent my time in the office, and Gunnery Sergeant Jones would say, "Lance Corporal Poe, hobble on down to the bachelor enlisted quarters and give this message to the duty NCO. My cast had a rubber foot on the bottom, so I was getting around without crutches. I would walk to the bachelor enlisted quarters and back no problem. The toe plate on my cast began to come loose and would flap as I walked. Because I was on light duty for a month, I had to go to a medical board. At the building for the medical board, the injured Marines going up for medical boards were all waiting outside. There was a dirtbag Marine in a cast waiting outside that would not shut up. He said the bone in his leg was thin and that they offered him a 30% disability and medical discharge, and he had declined it because he wanted more money. This malingerer kept saying, "Show me the money." I was disgusted by this dirtbag. I was called into the medical board and stood in front of 2 Navy captains, 06 rank, and a Marine Corps colonel, also 06 rank. One of the Navy captains asked me, "Do you want to get out?" I was stunned. I had never thought about getting out. I fumbled with my words and said something like, "Only if it does not get better," but they said I would be all right. It was an accident. They had thought I possibly shot myself intentionally, so they let me stay in the Marine Corps, and I was sent back to Bravo Battery. The weekend after my medical board, I had gotten some rolls of quarters and was going to go call my friend back in Texas named Gilbert. He was my next-door neighbor growing up, and we had been close as children. I used to call him every so often because he was the only friend I had back home whose phone number I had memorized. I would go to the payphones down by the center that had a deli and a barber shop. I opened the door to my room and Private Taylor, who was drunk, saw me and yelled, "I am going to get Poe." Private Taylor had never liked me. He was an older guy who had joined the Corps when he was 28, which is the last year before they would not let you join for being too old. Taylor had been a lance corporal, but had gotten busted in rank for being a troublemaker. He was supposed to take medication to keep him from drinking, but he drank anyway, and would get violent when he was drunk. He was the Marine who took drinks off the tray of drinks I bought the young lady in the Philippines when I paid her bar fine. Private Taylor started coming my way, so I quickly went back to my room and locked the door. Private Taylor then tried to get through the window of my room and was pulling on the screen. Soon he gave up. I waited about an hour, but I got tired of feeling trapped and went out my door. Drunken Taylor was still out there, and he grabbed me and dragged me down the balcony of the bachelor enlisted quarters and around the side of the building where no one could see us. Taylor was bigger and stronger than me, and in dragging me, he had broken the scabbed-on toe plate off my cast and hurt my toe. He trapped me against the railing with an arm on either side of me, pushing me into the railing and saying repeatedly, "I am going to kill you, Poe." He kept saying it and kept me trapped there for about 5 minutes, but it seemed like forever that he would not let me go. Finally, Lance Corporal Guerrero came around the corner and told Taylor that he had better let me go. At the bachelor enlisted quarters, there is an NCO, non-commissioned officer, and a junior enlisted Marine on duty 24 hours a day. I got away from Taylor and saw the duty NCO Sergeant Baker coming down the balcony and reported what had happened. As I was reporting him, I heard Guerrero say to Taylor, "He is reporting you." Taylor came running down the balcony toward us, but he got stopped by the duty NCO Sergeant Baker, who was even bigger than Taylor and outranked him. My toe really hurt now and, in a few days, had turned red. At night a few days later, I was looking at it in the bathroom, and you could see the end of one of the wires protruding through the skin at the end of my toe. I had always been able to see it, but now it was sticking out further. I grabbed it with my fingers and gave it a tug, and it came out, followed by some pus. The next day in the morning, I told Master Sergeant Martinez that my toe was bothering me, and he let me go to the sick call at 8 a.m. The Navy corpsman at sick call took one look at my red toe and sent me to the base infirmary, and the Navy doctor there, who was a woman, looked at my toe and saw pus around the wire that was on the side of my toe. She told me to go on the bus to Tripler at 10 a.m., and I got on the bus. I got to Tripler Army Medical Center and reported to the orthopedics hallway, and the doctor sent me down the hall to get my cast removed. The same sergeant who had put my cast on and did not read the order and left the toe plate off at first was the one who took my cast off. He complained again that I did not have my crutches, but I told him I would be all right and limped back down the hall to the orthopedics doctor. He took me in a side room with a second doctor and laid me down on a reclined chair like at a dentist, and they pulled out the remaining 2 wires with forceps. They then sent me to X-ray, and the X-ray showed that there was a broken off wire in the ball of my foot. The X-ray technician said, "One day it will probably come out." I went back to the orthopedics doctor with the X-ray film, and he looked at it and said they were going to admit me to the hospital because my toe was infected. I was admitted to an infection ward they called the 6-pack that had 6 beds in it. I was there for 3 days while they gave me antibiotics. My toe was sore, but what really hurt when I walked was the ball of my foot where the wire was. They gave me a wooden shoe to wear. After 3 days, I was discharged from Tripler Army Medical Center. I went back to the Bravo Battery, and the first sergeant told me I should have called. But I had never seen a phone at Tripler Army Medical Center, though I'm sure they had a payphone somewhere there, but I did not know the number to the battery office. I went to sick call and told the corpsman about the pain in the ball of my foot and that my toe was still sore, and the doctor put me on light duty for 6 months. Chapter 33, S1. At the battery, they did not know what to do with me, so when the lieutenants at Bravo Battery had to send a Marine to apply to be the new Battalion S1 publications clerk, they sent me down to the Battalion S1 office. I was one of 3 applicants there, as each battery that was still on base had to send an applicant. Of course, the battery that was currently deployed on Westpac 84 was immune from this technicality. I had to check out my records folder from CONAD, Consolidated Administration, which was an office near to where the gun battery offices were. I reported to First Lieutenant Holden at the battalion headquarters building. First Lieutenant Holden was the Battalion S1 officer and worked in the Battalion S1 office. He was scrutinizing the applicants sent by their respective batteries. The gun batteries did not like to give up the good Marines in their units, so they would send less than stellar applicants. First Lieutenant Holden looked at my records and saw that in boot camp I had a 120 as my test score. I forget the name of the test you take in boot camp, but a score of 65 is low, and a score of 160 is the highest score you could get. I looked good with a score of 120, which was considered high. I have always been good at taking tests. The other applicants did not even come close to my score. First Lieutenant Holden said, "You are a smart guy. Why would your battery send you?" I said that I had accidentally shot myself in the foot, and First Lieutenant Holden snapped back, "Well, you are stupid, but I got the job." I was transferred to Headquarters Battery 1st Battalion 12th Marines and had to move to a new room at the Bachelor Enlisted Quarters on the other side of the L-shaped building. The Headquarters Battery had all 3 floors of that section of the L. The sergeant from CONAD, Consolidated Administration, was on duty when I went to check in and get a room assignment. He gave me a room all to myself, and I had that room for 6 months alone. When I was alone in my room, I would occasionally hear the mumbling voices I could not understand. I came to call this the weather radio in my mind. I never told anyone about it. I did not want to look crazy. I was on light duty, but I got by because of the battalion message board. I did not go to morning formation because I had to be at the unclassified message center at Oro 600, 6 a.m. to pick up the messages. I then had to take the messages to battalion headquarters, where the S1 office was, and arrange them by the time that they were received, and two-hole punch them at the top, and put them on a clipboard that had rings at the top, and hang it in the hallway outside the S2, classified message center, so that it would be there when the officers arrived by Oro 700, 7 a.m., and they could read them. They had things like incident reports and other information important to officers. At the end of the week, I would file all the messages by date and time in folders in a file cabinet. So, no one at the headquarters battery ever missed me when they would have PT, physical training formations in the morning, and nobody knew I was on light duty at the battalion headquarters, except I had a limp. The battalion S1 manages all the correspondence that the battalion commander produces. There is a junior enlisted Marine that does nothing but type correspondence. This job was held by Lance Corporal Dawkins, and he had been to typing school in the Marine Corps and could type 120 words a minute error-free. The S1 office also files copies of all this correspondence. They also keep a publications library with all the Marine Corps orders. This is the job that I was getting, but it was staffed by Corporal McMorris, who was getting out of the Marine Corps in a month. It is supposed to be staffed by an NCO, non-commissioned officer, which is a corporal or sergeant, but they put in junior enlisted Marines in this position when they had to. There is an NCO that acts as an office manager. The current office manager was Sergeant Scott, and there are two officers, which are generally a first lieutenant as the S1 officer and a second lieutenant as his adjutant. The S1 was First Lieutenant Holden, and the S1 adjutant was Second Lieutenant Haydock. We had the first office on the right as you came into battalion headquarters. There was a half door that Marines could come up to when they had business at this office. Across the hall was a conference room, and next to that was the battalion sergeant major, who was Sergeant Major Holcomb. Next to him was the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bouchard. The files and publications clerk, which was going to be my new job, answered the phone for the battalion commander and the sergeant major. I could not just say hello, I had to say, 1st Battalion, 12th Marines S1. Be advised this is an unsecure line. Lance Corporal Poe speaking, may I help you, sir? You had to say it fast and not keep any high-ranking officers waiting. One time, the sergeant major went into the battalion commander's office and had to apologize. A new lieutenant had answered the phone of the S4 supply office when the sergeant major had called and was fumbling through all that you had to say when you answered the phone, and the sergeant major got frustrated and said, "Cut the crap, son, and let me talk to the major." It is forbidden for enlisted men to disrespect officers. Behind my desk was a shelf with binders and books on it. It was all the orders. The orders told exactly how to run things in the Marine Corps. There were Marine Corps orders that covered the whole Marine Corps. There were regimental orders that covered the whole regiment. There were brigade orders that covered the brigade, and there were battalion orders that covered the battalion. They all had to be kept up to date, and changes to them would come often, which I had to make. This usually was in the form of new pages to replace old pages that were in a binder. Sometimes, however, I had to cut out paragraphs from a copy and staple them over the old paragraph in the order. I had the hardest time with the flag manual. Before Corporal McMorris left, he did not tell me about the flag manual. The flag manual was a Marine Corps Order 10520.3. Supply needed to reference it when they ordered flags for unit guidons. So, they sent Marines to the S1 who would ask for the flag manual. The first time someone from Supply asked me for it, I did not know what they were talking about, and they went back to their unit empty-handed. The staff sergeant then came to the office and raised hell. If they had asked for Marine Corps Order 100520.3, they would have gotten it straight away, but they always just said, flag manual. There were times when I was not at my desk, and a Marine from CONAD, Consolidated Administration, would be filling in, and he was familiar with the Marine Corps orders and their numbers. But they would ask for the flag manual, and he would not know what it was, and they would go away empty-handed, and the staff sergeant would come and raise hell again. Finally, I put a note on the desk that said, the flag manual is Marine Corps Order 10520.3. That way, I would not get in trouble with the staff sergeant from Supply. Sergeant Scott, who ran the S1 office, was very proficient at his job. He was a stickler for neatness in managing the papers to be filed. They had to be perfectly aligned, and the staple had to be a quarter-inch from the top and parallel to the documents. He taught me how to file by date and alphabetically. Every day there were some papers to file. When I first got there was a Marine from CONAD, Consolidated Administration, filling in while Corporal McMorris was on leave. He was supposed to file the daily correspondence, but he had hidden the papers in his desk. Sergeant Scott had found a big stack of papers in his desk drawer, and so he used those to show me how to file them. He showed me that first, you put all the papers in order by date, and alphabetically, and then filing them in cabinets was much easier, as you could go through it from the start to the finish in a straight line. This was better than going page by page and having to jump around in the system. We had an inspection of the publications library one day. We had prepared for it, and Sergeant Scott was determined to get an outstanding. The inspection was done by Corporal Koch from Regimental Headquarters. Corporal Koch was a woman Marine. She was Hawaiian and she was beautiful. She had a list of Marine Corps orders that had been changed recently, and she went through our library and checked them all to see if we were up to date. She found one out-of-date order, but we were allowed to fix it while she was still there, and we got an outstanding on our inspection. Sergeant Scott had sent me to the Gidunk, deli that had sandwiches and sodas, at a pavilion just across the parade field outside battalion headquarters to get us sodas during the inspection. Corporal Koch left a half-drunk soda on my desk, and I was in such love with her that I left it there and would not remove it for 2 weeks. Sergeant Scott was getting out of the Marine Corps because he could never qualify with a rifle, which every Marine must do. He had thick glasses and could not see well. He would never make staff NCO, staff non-commissioned officer, without a rifle qualification, so they were not letting him re-enlist, so he was transferring to the Navy where he could advance, because in the Navy you do not have to be a qualified rifleman. I was at the S1 for over a year. The wire in my foot was still painful, and I could not run 3 miles and was on light duty still. Sergeant Scott had left, and we got Corporal Borney in as his replacement. Corporal Borney was not as good as Sergeant Scott. He had taken a liking to Lance Corporal Dawkins, the typist, and let him go work at the mailroom. He then had me type a bunch of meritorious mass on the IBM computer system. Meritorious mass must be perfect, and all the ones I did came back for corrections. We had gotten a new S1 First Lieutenant Nicholas, and he was mad, and made Corporal Borney and I stay late and fix them. Corporal Borney tried to make me fix them, but I told him I was not a typist, and he had to fix them while I worked on my publications. We were there until 2100, 9 p.m. The staff sergeant from Supply was getting a divorce, and Corporal Borney was fraternizing with him at night, going to bars and meeting loose women. Corporal Borney was married, and he would be on the phone with his wife telling her he had to go out with the staff sergeant because he was hurting. I never liked Corporal Borney. Chapter 34, Discharged. It was the summer of 1985, and I had been at the S1 for over a year. The commanding officer of the battalion liked me, as I answered his phone for him for a year now. He wondered why I was not a corporal, as the billet for publications clerk calls for. When he found out I was on light duty for over a year, he sent me to another medical board. I still had pain in the ball of my foot when I walked. Over the years it got better, but I still get pain in my foot from the broken wire from time to time. It never came out like the X-ray technician at Tripler Army Medical Center said it might. I did not have to go stand in front of the medical board this time, and after a week, I received an adjudication from them that said I was to be honorably discharged at 10% disability. They held the usual interviews of applicants, and First Lieutenant Nichols selected a Lance Corporal named Frigario. I trained Lance Corporal Frigario for a month. Then word came down that I had to have a line of duty misconduct investigation, and that took another month. The officer who did the investigation talked to my brother on the phone, and my brother told him that the guns were loaded when he gave them to me, and that it had been an accident. I knew this because I answered the phone and had listened in on the call. We had gotten yet another new First Lieutenant S1 officer, and Lance Corporal Frigario told him that he wanted to go back to Charlie Battery as he did not like working in an office, and the First Lieutenant let him go. I had trained Frigario for 2 months, and he knew what he was doing. So, they got another Lance Corporal in to do the job of files and publications clerk. A few days later, Corporal Borney told me my orders had come through. I felt bad leaving an untrained Marine at my old job, but I began the checkout process. To check out of the Marines, you are given a sheet, and each entity listed must clear you and sign your form before you are released. You check out at places like Supply where you turn in your deuce, combat gear. You check out at the armory where you turn in your magazines, and they know they can reissue your rifle to another Marine. I went to check out at the S1, and when I was there, the staff sergeant from Supply was there ragging on the new Lance Corporal about the flag manual. I went last to check out at CONAD, Consolidated Administration, and that is where they go over your discharge paper called a DD-214. My DD-214 said that my entry into service was December 10, 1982, and my separation was October 18, 1985. It said that my reserve obligation would be over on October 18, 1985. It said that my discharge was honorable. It says that I was a rifle expert, had a sea service deployment ribbon, and a meritorious mast. It said that my good conduct commencement period started December 10, 1982. If I had been in 52 more days, I would have rated a good conduct ribbon. It says I was to be paid $4,573.80 severance pay for my disability, which was rated at 10%. The form was signed by Chief Warrant Officer Convoy Battalion Personnel Officer. I was directed to go to dispersing and pick up my check, and was officially out of the Marine Corps.